Your first shift at your new job starts in half an hour, but your battery's dead and your car won't start at all. With an AMA membership, you get 5 roadside saves a year, including boosts, for less than $9 a month. AMA, we will save you.
Blog Talk Radio.
This is Lori Smith. This is One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, Restoration, and I'm glad to be here. It's Monday morning, January 15th, 7:30 here in the morning, Calgary, Alberta. And, I hope you had a good weekend. I hope all is well in your life. And thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate all the people who are taking the time to listen to the show and spending time with me here on Blog Talk Radio. And this show is really just a morning reflection, really just looking at information that I find helpful in my own healing journey and talking about, abuse and adult survivor issues and things like that. So, it's mainly just my healing journey here on this show. I've been doing this for a long time, quite a few years now. Next year will be 10 years. So November 2019 would be 10 years. So I had no idea how long I'd be doing these shows, and I just thought, well, I'll keep going. So I appreciate everybody who's taking the time to be here with me. It's been a long journey, and hopefully, like I said, you're getting something out of these shows. And so we'll get right into it. It's just a morning reflection, looking at positive reinforcement, really, self-care. Sometimes we look at coping mechanisms, meditation for the day. I sort of have been putting that one off, but we might get to some of that at some point. And it's only half an hour show, so it goes pretty fast. So I really haven't had time to squeeze that in there, really. But if you're a survivor of abuse and you're just starting out on your healing journey, you want to make sure you're safe enough to listen to something like this, anything like this, anybody's shows dealing with their own stories or abuse-related issues, adult survivor issues. Make sure you're safe enough before you listen to something like this. If you're not sure whether you're safe enough or not, whether you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else or just have a miserable day or go backward in your healing journey or something, you really don't want that. So if you're not sure if you're safe enough, just turn the show off and get that information. You can get this or go, you wouldn't be hurting my feelings if you turn the show off, right? Just get this information. You can get it from Havoca, HAVOCA. That's one website that I've seen some safety first information there, as well as the ASCA, Adult Survivors of Child Abuse and More Center program. They have a safety first chapter that's amazing. I read it a long time ago. It was really worth taking the time to read. It's like 60-something pages long. It's called Safety First, and it's the first chapter in their Survivor to Thriver workbook, which is free. You can grab it online at ASCA, Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, ASCA, a More Center program. That's their website there. Just type in ASCA, Adult Survivors of Child Abuse, and it'll come up. And their Survivor to Thriver workbook's right online. You can read it there. You can grab it. You can download it as a PDF if you have that ability, or I think you can actually order it if you want to order it. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a cold. It's absolutely horrible. And so, yeah, you want to make sure you're safe enough before you listen to anything like this. If you're a survivor and you're just starting out on your healing journey, get some help. Don't struggle through this stuff on your own. And if you're anybody else, you have to listen at your own discretion. Really, I'm talking about abuse, very sensitive material, and so you have to listen at your own discretion. Make the right choice for yourself, right? And we're going to get right into this. We're looking at an article on grief, really. This is the whole grief work thing from Havoca, information for survivors on their website there, HAVOCA, havoca.org. Help for adult victims of child abuse. And we're looking at grief, and we've looked at the beginning piece of it. The last couple of shows, you can go back and listen to it if you want to. And then we're going to move on this morning to looking at denial, which is shock and denial, the very first stage, really, of grief, of the 5 stages. So that's where we're going to pick up this morning. And so I'm just reading away from their website, avoca.org, survivors, under the grief tab, under denial. So that's the section that we're in here this morning. And we're just going to get right into it. So I'll just start reading right from where they start out here. I haven't read this ahead or anything, so this is the first time I'm seeing all this stuff. Denial takes many forms, and it is mentioned regularly throughout these web pages. In its strongest form, it is called repression. The person has no conscious recall of the event. The event stays in the victim's unconscious and has an effect on him or her, but he or she does not realize it. So it stays in the unconscious but it does have an effect on the person. And whoever this person is, the survivor doesn't realize it. This is where a lot of self-sabotaging comes in. People who may not remember that they were abused because it happened when they were so young or something, or they blocked it out, repression, like memory repression, traumatic, PTSD type stuff. What's that called? Dissociating. And things like this, that can happen. It does happen to a lot of people. It's not uncommon. It's actually more common than uncommon. It's absolutely horrible. For me, it was like I never really had that problem. I did stuff the abuse, some of it, some of the time, but I never really had a problem with remembering or recalling certain things. Some of it was a little fuzzy, especially the CSA, child sexual abuse. I sort of blocked that. I knew it had happened. I knew what had happened, but I just didn't want to acknowledge it. It was just like I put it in a drawer because I was already being abused, so I just stuffed it in this little drawer inside my head. Key there, and I locked it, and I put the key away for another day. Right. I knew I was going to have to deal with it eventually, but I just didn't realize that I didn't realize how it affected my life until I started taking a look back, and this was now starting like 10 years ago when it started to really hit me that, this was something I was going to have to deal with, and I really had no idea how to even go about doing it, how to go about unlocking that drawer to open it up to say, okay, I'm going to deal with this now. It was absolutely horrific. I'm glad I didn't do this alone. I actually had a friend help me through it. a good friend who used to be a sort of like a psychotherapist, who is not practicing anymore, but she still has all the skills, and really helped me out a lot. So I'll just say that. And a program called Your Envisioned Mind, out of Australia by Beverly Searle, that really helped me out a lot. So this lady and my good friend and this program really helped me out. So I wasn't really on my own dealing with it, thank God. You want to make sure you get some help. It's really difficult, this stuff. And I wouldn't suggest anybody do this on their own. That's why I'm glad I started reaching out. Like 10 years ago, it was basically when, I'd say I started my healing journey, but I really started reaching out in 2009, 2010, right in there, and started really getting help from it for these issues. So, I would say get some help, So they said here, a less powerful form of denial is suppression. The person who was abused has some memory of the abuse but seeks to ignore the meaning of the information. That was me, is more suppressed. Although the thoughts are available to the victim, they try to block them out, build a wall or barrier to prevent those memories from entering from the subconscious into the person's consciousness. And that's where I was. I had them in a little drawer. I just call it a little drawer. I just put everything, all this horrible stuff in a drawer, and I locked it and put the key away. And they said here, sometimes they do become clearer, but the person becomes adept at controlling the thoughts and suppressing them back into the subconscious. And eventually, and with a lot of hard work, survivors of abuse will be able to bring more of these memories into their conscious mind, and start to believe they happened. This will only happen if the survivors feel they are in a safe enough environment to allow these memories out. That's what happened to me. I finally got in touch with this stuff around 2010, 2011. And that's when I wrote my book, One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, The Journey, dealing with the CSA child sexual abuse, because I really had put that stuff away. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to acknowledge it. I knew what had happened to me. All along. It's just, I was just horrified by it, and I didn't want to deal with what had actually happened. It said usually the longer the abuse has been suppressed, the harder and longer it takes for the denial phase to end. Staying in the denial stage is costly. It stifles creativity. The victim cannot think spontaneously because the victim is censoring themselves to avoid recalling abuse memories. Keeping a secret requires a lot of energy. Even more energy is required to keep that secret from yourself. Isn't that the truth? Recovery frees this energy for other uses. Other costs of denial include vague fears of loss of control, specific but irrational fears of loss of control, such as suddenly vomiting in public or wetting a person's pants, things like this. A decreased ability to be empathetic with adults, babies, or pets that are in pain, or a desire to punish or hurt those who are vulnerable. In order to deny your own experience, you will probably want to avoid seeing others' pain and vulnerability. They said a helpful technique throughout all stages of recovery is writing letters that you never send. Writing helps you slow down your thoughts and start to become more aware of your emotions. It's important to feel your feelings as well as think them. Some people express themselves more freely through art. They said perhaps you could try clay or making a picture book of your life. Try drawing a picture of anger or of fear. You'll be surprised what comes up. So that's their little piece on denial. And it's quite interesting. This is so true. Like for me, a lot of this stuff, maybe not everybody would experience this stuff, but I know for myself, if we want to be completely honest with ourselves, I see a lot of this stuff in me, and I know that my mother was my main abuser, really, not for the CSA child sexual abuse, but all the rest of it. And my dad was also in there too, with what he did. But my mom was my main abuser because she was just so horrific to me. And my dad kind of ignored me unless he was just going to hit me or something. He didn't really pay any attention to me because I was the last child, and he was already 40. What was he? My mom was 38. He was 42 when I was born, so by the time I came around, he was 52. By the time I was 10, he really didn't have any interest in me at all, except for if he was angry at me or something, and he had to felt that he had to punish me for something or whatever, which ended up to be abuse because it was just horrific what he was doing. And same with my mom. But my mom was my main abuser because she spent a lot of time berating me, degrading me, abusing me physically. And just not getting my needs met, or either that or micromanaging and abusing me, in just any way she just desired that day or whatever. So I kind of put most of the blame on my mother, but I see a lot of this stuff in her because my mom was abused. So my mom had way more patience with adults. That's why her adult children she could deal with. She really couldn't deal with little babies or children, like little children, for her own. She babysat other people's children and was perfectly good to these children. But she and even her own grandchildren, she was really good to, and she loved her grandchildren. But her own children, she couldn't do that for, because she was in pain. So she didn't want to see your pain, even though she was causing your pain. She was causing my pain. She was causing my siblings' pain. So was my dad. And she didn't want to see that, so we were not allowed to express any emotion, or we weren't allowed to be in pain. So if she was beating me, for instance, I was not allowed to show any kind of emotion or anything, because then I'd just be beaten more. I talk a lot about that, especially in my Born in Hell website, if you want to go check that out, and the videos that I did, really talking about the issues. And I can see a lot of this in my mom. She never dealt with her abuse, and the fact that she was abused and she was a survivor of abuse, she never dealt with any of it. So she was, a lot of this stuff I see in her for sure, and even a little bit in myself. I have a tendency to be on the actually, and it's not even noticeable. I don't even do it on purpose, or it's not something I sit around thinking, yeah, that person's more vulnerable than I am, so I'm going to hurt them. It's a problem that it's there. It does happen. I know, especially when I was younger, people who were more vulnerable than me, or people who were more innocent than me, or more, I don't know what you want to call it, more weak. I would say weaker than me. I would say, I would definitely want to not necessarily be mean to them, but I didn't want them around me. It's kind of like, it would just bother me that it's like, I don't know what that is. That's a horrible, horrible way to be. And I got that from my mother, I'm sure of it. And they're connecting that with denial, which I think is really interesting. And also just vague fears of loss of control, right? Specific but irrational fears of loss of control. I guess that's what it all stems from. It's a little weird. And I guess I have to be sure that other people are very sure of themselves when they're around me. That might be a part of it, because otherwise it's a loss of control. You have to be able. I have to be comfortable with who's around me, so that I know what they're going to do, right? Because people who grow up abused don't trust very easily, don't trust other people. And so trust is a huge issue. And so if you don't know what a person's up to, where they're coming from, it's hard to be around them. So that's probably why I don't have a lot of people in my life personally. It's just because I don't trust people, and I'm always on the lookout for rejection, or just more pain, more abuse, And so if I don't feel that I know what somebody's really made of, then I don't want them around. And especially people who are kind of double-minded, or a little bit more vulnerable or weaker than me. It's like, no, I need somebody who's strong and knows where they're going, what they're doing around me. And I think that's probably that fear of loss of control. That's really quite interesting. But I know my mother, I see a lot of this in her, so I see some of it in me too. And, that's not a good way to be, right? Not at all. And as far as writing letters and stuff, what they're talking about, as far as that helpful technique they're talking about, writing letters and stuff, and writing. I started writing a blog, and that's exactly how this whole thing started. Was 10 years ago, I started writing a blog called Not So Fond Memories Growing Up in an Abusive Household, and an abusive home or something. There was a blog I put out there, and it became my book, A Life of Death, The Redemption. And it was just a blog. I just was writing this blog because I wanted the world to know what my dad had done, what my mom had done, what my brother had done. I really didn't talk too much about what my brother had done, but I was really, that was for my own safety, my own security, to write that public-facing blog, because I was afraid that my dad would kill me. He was staying with me for a year, and he was very mentally ill. He's passed on now, but he was psychologically ill his whole life, and he just wasn't any better at the age of 88 or however old he was. And I just thought, just in case he kills me or something here, at least the world will know. It was just my way of staying safe. But the thing is I turned that into that book where I just took the blog and we published it as the book, right? And with very little editing, it just sort of stayed the same. But then I started writing another book, actually, La Vida Juvies, which was my teen years. And then a friend of mine was like, well, you ought to just keep writing, So I kept writing, and I wrote the One Child Abuse Survivor to Another, The Journey. That was about the CSA child sexual abuse. That was the hardest thing I've ever done, was to have to face that and look at the memories and see and look and actually acknowledge what my 21-year-old brother had done to me, which was to damaged me for life, I mean, not just the emotional scarring, psychological scarring, but the fact that I'd been made barren by CSA child sexual abuse. And I had to face that and, remember this gynecology report that I had when I was right around 22 years old, 21, going on 22. And remembering this gynecologist talking to me about this, and this all was so uncomfortable for me at the time. I remember being 21, 22 years old and having to deal with this and then stuffing it again because I didn't want to deal with it. And then at the age of, 45 or whatever, having to look at it again and actually say, okay, I'm going to deal with this, It was absolutely horrific. And writing helped me out a lot because it helps me to get through it. Like they said, it helps you to slow down, quote unquote, your thoughts, they're actually saying here, and start to become more aware of your emotions. And it's important to feel your feelings as well as think them. Some people express themselves more freely through art. But I would say if you're going to do this stuff, you want to make sure that you're not doing it on your own. Because if you're just starting out on your healing journey and you're working through this stuff, this can be very, very difficult to do. I always say this because I know some people who struggle. I know other survivors, and this stuff, you don't want to go backwards in your healing journey. You don't want to hurt yourself. So I would never suggest somebody do this stuff on their own. I'm glad I wasn't on my own. I actually had people checking in on me, like, pretty much every day, to make sure that I was all right and, that I wasn't going to hurt myself or, kill myself or commit suicide or whatever, right? And because I had suicidal ideation my whole life. And so I was very thankful to have these people in my life that helped me to get through this. So that's why I always say, don't do this on your own. It's very, very difficult. And so that's the first part of that grief work, the denial. And the next one up is looking at the next stage of the 5 stages of grief after shock and denial is anger. And anger we'll look at on Friday. And you can go to havoca.org, havoca.org, and check that out yourself ahead of time here, or just read the whole article. It's really quite interesting. It's good stuff. Anger, shock and denial, that's avoidance, confusion, fear, numbness, blame. The anger section we're going to look at Friday has kind of covers frustration, anxiety, irritation, embarrassment, and shame. So that'll be interesting to look at. So we'll move on. We're going to look at, positive reinforcement. What are we doing right in our daily walk? Looking at positives and progress, sort of thing, instead of just always looking at the negative. It's so easy to look at the negative all the time. Oh, I didn't get this done, and I'm this, and I'm such a loser, or whatever. Becoming too hard on ourselves, especially coming from abusive environments or being abused as children. It's really easy to do this again as an adult, to run ourselves down. And so that's why I like to look at a positive reinforcement every day, and I think it's important to do this. Havocus has some self-esteem affirmations, and we're just working our way through some of them. And so these will help me to see where I'm at as far as my feelings towards myself go, and I think that's important. This next one up that I want to look at for after we looked at I'm respected and well liked by all people that I know. The next one up is I accept and acknowledge unconditionally my individuality and unique personality. Now that's funny. We could say that to ourselves all day. I accept and acknowledge unconditionally my individuality and unique personality. Well, that's easier to do than easier said than done. As far as accepting ourselves, this is the issue. Especially for me coming from abuse. My problem is I think my biggest problem is my problem. I've been talking for 10 years about what my problem is here, but my problem is mainly that my mother rejected me. That's a horrible thing, but it's very true, and it's because I was born out of rape. So she told me as a child. She told me when I was really little that I was a rape child. Just get away from her. She didn't love me. She couldn't love me. I was a rape child by my dad, who had been marital raping my mother for years. And I'm not sure how many of us are rape children, but I know I am. So she didn't want me. This was easy for her. Because she could reject me because I was a rape child, she had no problem abusing me, physically, verbally, emotionally, psychologically. It was easy for her to do because she didn't have an attachment with me. It wasn't like she was abusing something that she cared about, some little child that she loved and never would want to hurt ever. She didn't want me around. I was not wanted, right? So she didn't want any of her children, actually, but especially me because I was the last baby that lived. I actually made it. And the 2 before me had died stillborn. So my mom used to tell me, you should have died with the other 2 stillborn babies that were born. You should have died with them. Or she'd say stuff like, I should have killed you. You shouldn't, you never deserve to live like those other 2 stillborn babies. Stuff like this she would tell me when I was growing up. and she made it very plain and clear that I was not wanted. I was just this rape child who she now had to look after, and I was just so much trouble for her. That made it so easy for her to grab a belt and beat me with it, or just beat me with heavy objects and spill my blood, and she didn't care. Like, it wasn't like a real problem. She never felt bad about it, right? And even later in life, never really felt bad about what she had done. Like, which really broke my heart, because I loved my mother very much, and we used to all my siblings and myself used to try to look after her, make sure that, keep my dad away from her and stuff. We really worked hard at that, and because he was abusive, also abusing us, and I just never could figure out why she wouldn't acknowledge what we had done for her. That we all loved her very much, and she was just so mentally twisted herself. She was just screwed right up. So, so was my dad. They were both abused children and then married. So you can check all my stuff out at my Born in Hill website if you want to. But it's absolutely horrific what this stuff does, So I have a problem with rejection. And I even have a hard time accepting myself half the time, I accept and acknowledge unconditionally my individuality and unique personality. I guess, I guess getting in touch with me, getting in touch with who I am, that's probably been one of the biggest things that I guess I've done for myself, is to allow myself to be okay with myself. That's probably why my healing journey has gone the way it's gone, which is quite good, because I'm actually learning to love myself and learning to accept myself for who I am, and find joy in life and meaning and purpose in my life here, right? It's a big deal, absolutely. So I think these are really interesting, these self-esteem affirmations from Havoka. And, I accept and acknowledge unconditionally my individuality and unique personality. And I know, I'm not perfect. Nobody I know around me is perfect. There is no such thing on this earth. And so, yeah, I have to accept myself as I am, unconditionally, with my flaws, my setbacks, and my problems, and realize, not be too hard on myself, and work to becoming a better person. That's my big thing. I'm just working on trying to be better to myself and better to people around me, just being a better person, and trying to learn how to truly love myself and love this life that I've been given, and love the people around me, which is very difficult. The only person I actually allow into my life really personally is my husband. And, I love him dearly, and he loves me both very much the same. And it's, it's a great feeling to have that. But in the meantime, I don't let very many people in my life, And it's because I don't want to, I have a hard time with relationships, so I don't want them hurting me. I don't want to hurt them. But these are the flaws, I'm still working on, right? And it's important to get in touch with this stuff. Absolutely. That's the only way we're going to be able to change and to make progress, is to accept our flaws and say, okay, I really need to work on this, because obviously I have a problem with this, and whatever these issues are, right? So rejection is a huge problem for me, which causes me then to reject other people. I usually reject them first, and that way I don't get hurt. So I have very few friends who can be in my life, because I reject them all, send them off, and then I'm kind of like, well, that's horrible, because I'm a friendly person, and I like having people around me. But as far as close relationships goes, right away, it's like if somebody starts getting close to me, I generally reject them, because I don't want them to reject me, because that's always what happens in my life. It's absolutely pathetic, but it's so true. And so, at the end of the day, we have to be okay with ourselves. That's the biggest issue. And we have to try to get the help that we need to make sure that we're making progress and not going backward, and not, repeating sort of the same old things, self-sabotaging and stuff like this, right? Very important. So we'll pick up here Friday. I have about a minute left here. And I hope you have a great week ahead. Just take care of yourself. Like I always say on all my shows, if you're struggling, you're having a hard time, you reach out and you get some help. You don't struggle on your own. Don't suffer on your own. Call a crisis line if you have to. That's what I'm going to do. If I ever get down that far down again, in my lifetime where I can't handle it, I'm calling a crisis line. I refuse to let this get let this get the best of me. I refuse. So, I wish you the same. That you would reach out and get some help. Right. Take care, everybody, and have a good week ahead.